Me.
Let me resume. All right. So first, thanks to everyone that's attending. For those who are going to be arriving late, you're not going to hear this until later on when you review the recording. Let me introduce my good friend Srini here. He is a data scientist and senior developer advocate at Preset. He is a Boston-based data scientist and senior developer advocate at Preset. That means in Boston, he's getting all the good fish food. Before that, he spent 7+ years in data science education, and helped build and scale DataQuest. He spent his entire career in startups across many different roles and aspires to draw from the diverse experiences to help build better data tools. So, oh man, my voice is going. Sir, I'm going to turn it over to you. I can't talk no more. Go for it. It's all yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean, for the intro. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming. I hope you're enjoying the conference so far. I guess I'm towards the latter half. So hopefully, thanks for hanging in there, and hope this is useful for folks. So let me just start by screen sharing. So hope everyone can see this. So today I'm here to talk about effective dashboard design. So I was having a conversation with Robert Hodges, and this is something that he encouraged me to talk about. I've spent too many lives creating dashboards, not all of which got used at the respective places I've worked. So I'm hoping to kind of share some of the lessons I've learned building dashboards, and specifically kind of how some of these apply to the tool that I help work on nowadays, called Apache Superset. So as John mentioned, my last company was DataQuest. I've been in startups my whole life basically. So I've kind of always embraced being at the art of the start and the cutting edge, and Preset is kind of no exception to that. So I'm a committer to the Superset project. We're an open source BI platform, and I'll kind of talk more about that as the talk goes on. And I switched from teaching data science basically at DataQuest to now advocating for better data tools. So kind of continuing this whole journey to just help more people become data literate. That's really kind of my passion and life goal. So that's kind of a little bit about myself. I was also a product manager at DataQuest, and I'll kind of mention in a few minutes why that's relevant. But that's kind of bringing that data and product hats is kind of how I started to build this framework for actually building dashboards that are effective, understanding what that means, and making sure that they actually drive impact in your organization. So I'll start with this kind of caricature that I'm sure many people who have been on the receiving end of requests to build dashboards. It's a very common story. I'm sure many people can relate. So can you build me a dashboard that does X? If we're lucky, it's more than that. They actually have an idea of what they want to see. And yeah, and oftentimes though, it's just like, can you build me a Google Analytics dashboard, right? It's a very common one. And so, that's kind of a day in the life. And I'm hoping to start with this caricature to kind of show better ways of approaching this. So in this example, you'll have, this is a very common request, right? So a marketing visitor Google Analytics dashboard. They have some metrics in mind. So number of visitors, number or percentage of conversions, country of origin for both visitors and conversions, keywords that are driving visitors, and the best converting landing pages. So you go off and you build this dashboard, and then you might get a little bit of feedback on the location of the maps. They might say, "Well, I actually want the map at the top." That's easy, quick change. The second ask is a little bit more complicated. I want to be able to filter by the marketing campaign that drove this activity. Sounds simple, but the challenge here is that in your organization, you may not even have that data in the same database. It could be still living in the SaaS tool. It could, just be in a completely different database that maybe you don't have access to. And the third common one is, can you actually also add in data on purchases? So it's really the full funnel, right? You want to understand the people who's visiting your product, all the way to people that are actually converting, and paying. So not just signing up, but actually paying. But that data might be in Stripe. There's PII there. So from the perspective of an end user, these are problems that are often not relevant. They kind of think about this data as being in the same domain. And so the fact that there are these kind of disparate databases or weird quirks and hurdles to jump through may not, people might always have empathy for that. So I think the goal here is to kind of present an alternative that I found to be much more effective, and much more of a partnership instead of a throw it over the wall approach. So to kind of take a step back, like what really is a dashboard? I think this is something I've changed my mind on, and my thoughts here have evolved a lot. But I think Emily and Taylor's blog post from April 2021, I think, really hit the nail on the head. So the blog post is called "Run Your Data Team Like a Product Team," and it kind of espouses a philosophy of building data assets in an organization. And basically, they say that you should treat it like a product team. Like, maybe you have a Jira board, like people can request things. The idea of tracking bugs on your dashboard is kind of an interesting idea as well. But the broader point is, anything you generate based on the data in an organization, you should treat it like an internal product, which is a kind of a, as a former product manager, that really resonates with me, because I think they have a lot of the same tendencies. And so bringing that product thinking is, I think, really important. And so if you really think about it, it's just a dashboard is just another type of data product. And we may not consider all of these as products, capital P products, but they do have a lot of the same properties that we need to think about. So it could be anything from, a notebook. And so there's now new companies trying to build dynamic notebooks and making them a little bit more end user friendly. People may ask you for a CSV or a Google Sheet or an Excel file. That's a data product as well, right? There's a liability in sending someone a data set sometimes. And it's, we should treat it just like everything else. Sometimes it's a model. So if you're at Amazon and you have APIs between different teams, then the product could be a model, an API model. It could be a dashboard, which obviously is kind of the focus here today. It could be a report. So sometimes, if it's for an investor or a board of directors meeting, it may be a PDF or a slide deck, also a data product, or it could be a data story. So something that gets published on social media that's informed by data, etc. So there's all of these have, kind of the same type of same considerations around usage and feedback, and actually understanding even data rot, right? So if you share something and a month later it's rotting, like what is that? How does that impact the work that you've done? And so I think this is kind of how I think about dashboards. It's one of a number of different data products you might have in an organization. I think that really helps. And as a corollary to that, what do people expect out of a dashboard? Like, where do dashboards actually shine in comparison to some of the other things that I've listed, the other types of data products? So first, I think people generally expect dashboards to reflect updated data. I think that's kind of a given. Otherwise, it's a frozen report, it's a PDF, or a tweet. Information should be accurate. That's a broad statement, but generally people do not expect kind of data quality issues or other, data kind of behind the scenes or back end related issues to bubble up to the dashboard. They expect it to be accurate and up to date. Ideally, the insights lead to new questions and interventions. So they're not just showing kind of basic information. They're actually pushing people to think about what they should change or an intervention they should try. They should be dynamic to some degree. So unlike a report or a notebook, there's an expectation that people can self-serve a little bit. Not to the extent of a full-blown analysis, because these people are busy. This is not their full-time job. It is analyzing data. But people do expect some dynamicness, even if it's just a date-time filter. And lastly, insights are mostly delivered visually. Dashboards are full of charts. You might have some text and labels, but visual insights are the key. And so this is kind of, to really sets the stage. This, if the thing that people are asking for in an organization meet these criteria, then I would say move forward with a dashboard. Otherwise, you may want to think about an alternative. So this is kind of one of my favorite frameworks from my time as a product manager, and it took me a while to really internalize it, but it really resonates with me. So in product management, you're kind of mapping out the problem space here on the left. So there could be a challenge that you're approached with. A common one is, people are churning. Why is that? Or people are starting the onboarding and they're not completing it. Also a very common problem you might be given as a product manager. And you kind of map out the whole problem space. What are all the kind of different reasons that that's happening? And then, you might do some user research, et cetera. And then you kind of define the one or two problems that you really want to solve, or you reframe the problem. Maybe it's not really completing onboarding that's the issue. It's something else about the messaging or a lack of commitment or something else, right? So that you kind of are able to, once you've mapped out the problem space and really kind of gone deeper, you can actually focus in and redefine the problem. And then you can start to prototype. This is where you kind of build something simple. You might show wireframes or mockups with users if you have access to them, or you might do A/B tests to test them live. And then finally, after a few weeks, and if you're a bigger company, this could be a few months or even a few years, you finally kind of arrived at a solution, right? And so the other shorthand for this is discovery versus delivery. So on the left is discovery, you're trying to understand what is the right thing to build. Delivery is how do we actually deliver the right thing? So it's kind of two different phases. And my whole premise and my whole opinion is I think this type of life cycle should also be applied for really any data product, but specifically for internal data dashboards as well, because I think that's really how you avoid some of the issues that I mentioned up here, where there's kind of a lack of context into why something isn't possible, and it's kind of more of a shared partnership approach, and it's just more agile and it's more likely to converge to a useful dashboard. And so I redrew this kind of double infinity into my own diagram. And so basically I recommend doing some type of lightweight design process. It doesn't have to be crazy. You should really ideally don't spend weeks and months on this process, but I definitely recommend doing some type of lightweight process. And I think there's generally two approaches that I've seen work well and that I've used as well. One is wireframes or paper mockups. Literally go to the person or the team that you hope will use the dashboard or who has requested it, and actually get an idea of what this dashboard could look like. And right off the bat, you might get feedback that hey, I actually want the map at the top, or this is the type of feedback that's simple but can be delivered as part of feedback from just looking at a simple sketchy prototype. The type that I actually prefer though is prototyping a dashboard very, very quickly using fake data. So I've done a lot of fake dashboards, prototype dashboards using Google Sheets or CSV files of sample data, or Excel files. And I think that's a really, really fast way to actually build something quickly and understand and get feedback from your partner to understand is this actually delivering the insights that they'd like? Is this empowering them to ask and answer the questions that they're looking for? So this is generally my preferred way of doing that. So I'll start with the kind of concrete example. So Superset's open source. We have a popular community, and as anyone who is active in open source, they're drowning in GitHub issues. Unless your project is not very popular, but then you have another problem. If you've reached some success in open source, you usually have way too many issues to manage, right? And so naturally, you want to build a dashboard. This is kind of a way to tame the chaos and help you kind of understand where to focus your attention and how to keep that issue count as low as you can. And so when this was posed to me internally at Preset, I actually built this in Google Sheets. Superset has Google Sheets integration. Most BI tools do as well. So you can actually generate some random data and have this. I basically created this in about 30 minutes. I didn't have to go, crawl through the crevices of our database schemas or anything. I just kind of conjured this data out of thin air, but it helped me actually understand, and it helped me kind of present something immediate, basically almost the same day in this case, and try to understand if this is directionally correct or not. And so the feedback that I got was this is cool, but here are actually the questions that I'm trying to answer. And this is key, right? So in that discovery delivery phase, we're kind of in the middle, which is people have sometimes a general idea of what they want, like, oh, I want to understand GitHub issues. Once they see a set of charts, I've often found that people have more concrete questions that they want to answer. So when they see these charts, they actually are able to get much closer at telling you the types of questions that they actually want to answer, because they're actually looking at some real charts, so they can understand the delta between what they're looking for and what's actually being presented to them. So the feedback I got was, well, I want to understand the types of issues that take the longest to close. They couldn't, when I pressed them, they didn't really know how to define type. That kind of job was left as an exercise to the reader, aka me, to figure out. Is it the type of contributor? Is it a label on the GitHub issue? Is it related? Is it something else entirely that doesn't even live in the data? And we have to run a feature engineering process to understand the type of label or issue that it might be. It's unclear, but that's it at least kind of gave me a little bit more insight. Two, I want to define and monitor a KPI around closed issues. So I actually want to understand how effectively is the team closing issues. And they really wanted to they were less interested in open issues. They really wanted to actually kind of just build a habit of, let's just close issues. And in some ways, the open issues, we don't really have to aggressively track those. If we just kind of really focus on closing issues was kind of the first iteration of this. And lastly, there's a sense that they want to be able to explore and dive deeper. So they want to be able to, in the classic slice and dice fashion, they want to be able to zoom in on older issues. They want to find recent issues. They want to be able to click through to them. And so my takeaway here is that they really kind of wanted a few different dashboards. These seem like simple questions, but actually designing effective dashboards to serve each of them is a little bit nuanced. And so I'll do a quick detour to talk about the types of dashboards. This has been kind of talked about a lot. There's a lot of research on this. My quick summary of it is that there's three general classes of dashboards. So analytical this is what I call focusing on the past. So you want to slice and dice the data. You want to kind of understand what worked in the past. Operational. So this is kind of, what people might think of as a real-time dashboard. So it's showing the current status of something. And so for GitHub issues, this particular thing was not that interesting. Our data, at the time only updated once a day. And being able to, if you really wanted to get a real-time view, just going to GitHub was actually the best way. And then strategic, so showing progress towards the future. So how far are we towards actually achieving our desired KPI and goal? And so kind of quick example of each of these, right? Operational, real-time, this is kind of like, very recent, and it's being updated regularly. Strategic, so this is, we have this page view goal or session goal. How far are we towards that? And then analytical. So this is actually, you see the filters here. You can see the repo name, the contributor type, issue state. So this is giving people more tools to actually slice and dice and explore the data as they see fit. And so if we go back to the feedback that we got from the end of the discovery process, there's kind of a mix of strategic, so trying to understand our progress towards a KPI, and then there's a little bit of the exploratory analytical dashboard as well. And so overview. So the way I ended up, resolving this was to have two different tabs. As one of the great things about Superset is you can have tabs. And so we actually have a overview tab. And you'll notice that there's actually different filters for each of the tabs. So this is what I call the overview tab. So this actually just has a high level picture. It helps the team understand progress towards goals. So if they're really interested in understanding the issues created in the last week versus issues closed, they can get a really quick snapshot of that. Right. This is kind of the first thing that loads when they come here. Open versus closed issues. This is interesting. Visualizing this type of stuff over time is kind of a challenge because the issues that are created in the last 3 weeks kind of overweigh the ones that are created 4 months ago, and they generally just have a lot more activity. So it's kind of an interesting challenge to try to visualize it. But this was one of the things that was requested. So it was cool to try to empower the team to understand closed versus open. How are we actually catering to that? And then also just understanding the age of issues. So in previous quarters, you can actually understand, of the open and closed issues, when were they originally created? So you'll notice that, there's not really any open issues left from 2020 and earlier, and rightly so, because you would imagine that the team, that the open source community and the team at Preset and the other organizations that we've worked with have already essentially tackled those issues. So no surprise there. We should expect the more recent issues that are still open to be in the last few quarters. And this is for the kind of request to understand just closed issues. So on a quarterly basis, how good is the team at actually closing? How many issues are they actually closing? And yeah. And so then there's also the exploratory dashboard, as I mentioned. So you'll notice here that I actually give people way more bells and whistles, so they can see a full list of the issues. And so this is a hint to them that they should be comfortable coming in and slicing and dicing things to zoom in to exactly the types of issues that they want to look at. And now this is very different from a strategic kind of overview KPI dashboard, where there's actually very limited functionality for them, because I really wanted them to actually come in and get a quick bird's eye view. If you put too many filters here, then you kind of run into a challenge where you kind of have this combinatorial explosion where every type of filter that you introduce is actually introduces opportunities for misinterpreting the charts. So if you just look at closed or open issues, for example, that skews a lot of these charts that are actually designed to show high level KPIs. Like you'll see zeros in a lot of places, and then you kind of lose that trust, right? If one of the goals of a dashboard is to be accurate, not using a filter in a right way can be perceived as something wrong with the dashboard. So instead, the goal is to have a secondary tab where people can do whatever they want, but it's kind of their responsibility as well to actually make sure that they're taking the right conclusions from it. And also by showing the actual issues that are resulting from the filters, they can also start to internalize some of the quirks of kind of zooming in on data. So if they actually see that there's no issues listed here, for example, that gives them a clue as to maybe they picked the kind of wrong combination of filters to actually answer their question. So being able to just show the data here and also having like URLs so people can go and open them in a new tab, this just kind of unlocks a lot more power for them. And they actually get close to the data. This brings back some of the positives of spreadsheets and Google Sheets. I think many people have been in a situation where the end user ends up just wanting a spreadsheet because they just want to look at the data, right? They like the charts, but they want to get their hands much closer and kind of much deeper in the weeds. And so this lets them do just that. They can actually download this as a CSV if they really wanted to. But in general, any type of filter that they apply, they get feedback, and they know they're kind of getting guidance as to how close are they to actually answering the question that we're hoping to answer. And so this is kind of the result of the design process essentially. Now, natural next question is like, how do we actually define effectiveness? And this is definitely a tricky one. I think unlike a traditional product where you might have things like revenue and churn and stuff like that, and kind of very clear business outcomes, for internal dashboards, you don't quite have that. And so you kind of need a combination of strategies, and you kind of need to rely a bit more on what effective feels like. So I call this dashboard user fit. I doubt I invented this phrase. I'm sure if you Google it, someone else has talked about it. But basically, just like you have product market fit, there's a great article, I think by First Round Capital, where they were talking about product market fit is something you just feel it, right? People are banging down your door to ask for more features. They want to sign up. They're spreading it to their friends and harassing others to try it out. And then they're, the daily active and weekly active usage percentages are really good. Like you kind of just feel it in your bones, and the data just kind of reinforces that idea. That's the same thing here. It's if you build a dashboard for one person or one team and you find that it's spread to other teams, then that's a great sign. That means you've done something hopefully useful. Feature requests. So if people hit you up and asking for more features, they want to be able to further dive into the data, etc. That's also obviously a great sign. And usage, some BI tools do give you actual usage data, and I think that's also, in my opinion, that's table stakes now, because you want to understand if it is a data product, just like other types of products you might build, you need some type of basic usage data. You don't want to rely just on qualitative feedback. So this is generally, it's maybe not a super satisfying answer. I think unfortunately it does depend on the type of organization you're in, the type of team that you're working with, the type of partnership you can build. But the goal really is that this process is meant to reach some of the problems much earlier and actually help people understand the types of questions they want to ask, and also force some conversations. So some of the conversations I mentioned earlier about lack of available data in your data warehouse or what have you, being able to show that early on to people, and before you've already built something that feels complete and shippable, I think also goes a long way and helps build empathy. So I'll quickly talk about Superset in particular and how it supports this. So for the discovery phase, right, as I mentioned, being able to prototype dashboards using CSVs, Excel files, Google Sheets, I think that's really important. If you have to wait to get access to the perfect database in your organization, then that's definitely a blocker. So being able to just start is super valuable. No code chart building just gives you more speed. So you can just take data that's there and just kind of create charts at the speed of thought. Super useful for prototyping. Being able to do some what I call last mile cleanup and transformation. We're definitely big believers in having this type of heavy lifting for ELT and transformation live much earlier in the data stack using a tool like dbt or transform. But for last mile stuff where you just need to change something in order to prep for visualization, being able to have a SQL IDE or a semantic layer is still useful here, as long as it's not too thick. And then having things like tabs and filters to break up dashboards is super helpful. On the delivery side, being able to, this is something that people don't often think about when it comes to BI tools is, what if a BI tool actually looked a lot closer to Facebook or LinkedIn or something like that, right? And if you think about those products, they've integrated really deeply into our lives. Some say perhaps too deeply, but I think BI tools are often on the complete opposite end, where you have to go and log in somewhere and know to remember to check it. So being able to have Slack and email alerts and reports to better integrate into people's workflow is super important. And as I mentioned earlier, your BI tool, I think at this point, having data on how it's used, the tab usage, like where are people clicking, but even at a minimum, who's opening the dashboard, and how many people and at what frequency, and that type of data is super valuable. And you can also, that also allows you to use Superset to understand Superset usage, which is kind of funny and interesting in its own right. And lastly, users are empowered to edit and remix without knowing SQL, as long as the metrics that you've created are well defined and prepped for the dashboards that you've already given them. They can fork it, go off on their own, add a few charts or customize what's already there. And as long as they are familiar with the constraints of the actual data, they're not expecting data that's not available, then they're empowered to make small changes, which is also awesome. I wanted to quickly plug Preset. So Preset started by many of the folks that work on Superset. For people that are interested in trying on some of the ideas that I mentioned, we have a free tier. So this is my obligatory plug for people to check it out and give it a shot. So you can kind of witness some of the power of the tool. We want to talk a little bit about takeaways. So as I mentioned, first understand if a dashboard is actually the right product. It may not be in many cases. But if it is, then it is a product, so treat it like one. Understand the types of dashboards that you're actually incorporating, and understand that they have very different use cases. If you're building a strategic dashboard, it's not going to be real time because strategy moves much more slowly than kind of real time tactical stuff. And so if you mix those in the same dashboard, you may not end up making anyone really that satisfied. Use data and user feedback to improve the dashboard. That's obviously critical. And choose a data product platform that supports this entire lifecycle. So, make sure you're able to get the qualitative and quantitative data that you need. And just being able to prototype is also super valuable as well. I'll end with a list of resources. So these have been the four most important things, or three, and then a mention of a recent blog post we've written. So as I mentioned, run your data team like a product team. I would just follow the locally optimistic blog, to be honest, because they've been really thinking about and publishing posts on the struggles of data in an organization. So I think they've done a lot of great thinking here, which is awesome. The Big Book of Dashboards is one of my favorites. It has 50 or 60 different dashboards. They are static ones, but it's a good overview of both data viz and actual dashboard design. 3, how the modern data stack is reshaping data engineering. This is a post that Max wrote, who's the original creator of Superset and the CEO of Preset. So this is really interesting because it talks about how as his background is in data engineering, so he talks about how the modern data stack and all these new trends like analytics engineering, how that's going to reshape the way data products are built internally and how the practice of data engineering happens moving forward. So also really relevant when thinking about building internal data products. And lastly, for people who are maybe newer to just data viz in general, if you just needed to read one book, Edward Tufte's book, Visual Display of Quantitative Information, is a classic. I highly recommend it. At the end of the day, dashboards are kind of baskets of charts. So being able to understand how to actually define what are the actual principles and definitions of good visualization is going to play a big role when you're actually building dashboards. And so that's it. Thanks for coming. Happy to answer some questions.
Just to mention, you can either drop in chat, use the raise hand. Oh, we do have one. Here we go. An anonymous attendee has asked, once your dashboard is well used, maybe the next step would be to move it to your own proprietary product. Do you have experience using Superset for embedded analytics, pardon my tongue, or in-app analytics? And if so, would you recommend Superset for such a use case?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually where, so there's two threads here. So one is there are definitely people in the Superset community, and if you join our Slack, you'll see an entire channel called Embedding Superset, where people are using Superset for exactly this. They're building entire platforms, data products, etc. It's everything from just embedding, like having the dashboard in Superset and just having that live somewhere publicly, to actually integrating it more deeply into people's products. So people have done this heavily with Superset. I will say it is a little bit tricky. You have to be relatively familiar with the code base because there's not just like a simple Helm chart you can deploy or just kind of a simple resource that has it. And so that is the one caveat that I had, is that historically Superset has been designed very much to be an internal BI platform, and it's been kind of slowly been hacked in a good way to meet this goal. But there isn't unfortunately a lot of good documentation for it. I will say, and then on the second part is that at Preset, this is actually our obsession for the next 3 to 6 months, is to understand both how we provide some leadership here for the Superset community and in our own product, so that people can. The eventual goal is to really help people build any type of analytics product for their customers. So you can imagine Slack analytics, Stripe analytics, most products nowadays have that type of end user analytics experience. That is where we want to help push the Superset project towards. So to summarize, it is possible right now. People are doing it. It does require some hacking and engineering creativity. In the next 3 to 6 months, the preset team is hoping to make that much easier and much clearer. And that's really kind of where we want to start taking Superset.
We have a question from Mr. Lopez, who, first of all, says you did a great presentation. Secondly, he wants to know if you could talk more about how to avoid users misinterpreting data or the charts.
Yeah, it's a good question. That's probably the bane of every data professional's existence. I think it's definitely challenging. I mean, I think there's a few different ways you can do it, right? So an analogy here is like, how do you avoid your kids making a mistake? You just control them. You just like put too many guardrails and training wheels and don't let them do anything. So that's kind of a little bit of a cheeky answer, but if you're in a very sensitive data environment, that is what most organizations end up doing. They just super ratchet up the privacy and security stuff, and you need 1 month approval to get access to certain type of data, etc. So that's probably not the environment that most people are in. They're probably more in the middle. I think the key here ultimately is it's a lot of human stuff. So for example, when you deliver a dashboard or you're helping someone use a dashboard, I mean, provide some basic training, like actually, provide training and some coaching around how to use the dashboard, so that they're able to avoid some of those mistakes. Some of them, as I mentioned earlier, the filter, the combinatorial explosion of filters. There's this kind of interesting tension always between accuracy and reliability of insights from dashboard and self-serve, free-form democratization of analytics. And I think that's a healthy tension to have, because ultimately most people are not full-time data professionals, but they still want to be able to self-serve. So I think this is where being sure that you're designing a suite of dashboards, that also helps, because that provides logical isolation. So my hope is the dashboard that I was showing in this example, that'll eventually have 4, 5, 6 different tabs. And then I think that helps provide separate contexts, and less opportunity for people to come in and just put in arbitrary filters and values, because that's really where you run into issues, when people are filtering and kind of zooming in on the data way too much in a given dashboard. So to kind of summarize, like, some level of coaching and education helps. Designing dashboards that are specific, like, don't be afraid to make a dashboard that only has 4 charts and like 2 filters. That's not such a bad thing. And use things like tabs or just different types of, different dashboard entities entirely to logically isolate things. And so the goal really is to let people self-serve and ask and answer the types of questions they want. It just isn't always in a completely free form, completely unbounded environment, because that is really where you kind of run into these issues, where people are doing kind of very crazy filtering, and they think that there's only 2 customers that did this very specific thing, or only 1% of people did this very specific thing. That's where you can run into trouble. But it's hard. I don't have a single answer. It is a little bit of an art and science, unfortunately.
We had a question from Mr. Figueroa. With Superset, how are tools like anomaly detection integrated?
Yeah, it's a good question. So right now, the current stance is, most people that are doing, most of the organizations we've spoken with, and even the general Superset philosophy, is that this is likely to happen just in the back end somewhere. I mean, traditionally, BI tools and visualization tools, detecting anomalies is a somewhat compute intensive activity, and it's not the type of thing that you just want your browser to kind of figure out live. It's usually kind of part of a larger machine learning or kind of data pipeline process. And so the way that we really think about it, and honestly most BI tools think about it, is that there's a separate kind of piece of data infrastructure or a separate pipeline specifically for this, and then that data is made available to your BI tool. So you'll have information on potential anomalies surfaced, in the data model in the database that your superset instance is connecting to, and then you can create charts and visualizations that then elevate that to end users so they can come in and kind of observe that those anomalies. But there's nothing kind of in the front end and visualization layer right now for anomaly detection. It is very much it's very much assumed that you'll do this in the back end. We did do an event, 1 month ago with MindsDB, and we kind of did a cool showcase where MindsDB is basically doing machine learning in your SQL database, and they are able to do some of that anomaly detection in the database itself, and then just have that information showed as columns. And so once it's database columns, table columns, any BI tool can showcase that anomaly detection. So yeah.
All right. Anyone else? All right. That may be it. First of all, thank you very much for giving us that presentation. I appreciate your time on that. And if there's any other questions, you feel free to leave them in the lobby or forward them to us, and we'll try to get them in. But thanks again to everyone who attended. Thank you for presenting, sir. Mr. Vidal thinks that you were awesome. I agree. And with that, I'll go and end that out, and I'll catch everyone else on another session. I'm still here. I'm not leaving, folks.
Great. Thanks again.
All right. Bye now.